Just ahead on One Detroit, we're bringing you an in-depth conversation with renowned urbanist Richard Florida about Michigan's future. Contributor Zoe Clark of Michigan Radio talks with Florida about attracting and retaining workers and growing the state's population. Plus, we'll share ideas on what you can do in the Detroit area this weekend and beyond. It's all coming up next on One Detroit.
From Delta Faucets to Behr Paint, Masco Corporation is proud to deliver products that enhance the way consumers all over the world experience and enjoy their living spaces. Masco, serving Michigan communities since 1929. Support for this program is provided by the Cynthia and Edsel Ford Fund for Journalism at Detroit Public TV.
The DTE Foundation is a proud sponsor of Detroit Public TV, among the state's largest foundations committed to Michigan-focused giving. We support organizations that are doing exceptional work in our state. Visit dtefoundation.com to learn more.
Nissan Foundation, and viewers like you.
Welcome to a special episode of One Detroit. As part of our ongoing Future of Work series, we're delving into one of the most important challenges for the state of Michigan, growing our population. Earlier this year, Governor Gretchen Whitmer announced the creation of the Growing Michigan Together Council and the appointment of the first ever Chief Growth Officer to tackle Michigan's sluggish population growth. One of the major issues is how to attract people from outside the region to fill jobs and retaining those who are already here. Michigan Radio political director and One Detroit contributor Zoe Clark spoke with leading urbanist, author, and professor Richard Florida about the problems and possible solutions as we imagine Michigan's future.
Richard, I love to pick your brain, and I want to start with just this eye-opening fact, this report that came out this spring that really sort of had the buzz of Mackinac, that showed the dire state of Michigan's population growth, or lack thereof, really. When you hear of a state, any state, right, incapable of growing its population, first, just what's the first thing that comes to mind for you? Like, what is the problem?
Well, it's important news, but it's not new news. I mean, I've been doing this for a while. And if you've been studying demographics and economic change, population growth or decline, one thing you know, if there's one fact you know, it's that the Sun Belt has been growing and the Frost Belt has been declining. For a while, I don't know if this is true anymore, but for most of the past 4 decades, housing has been a lot more affordable in the Sun Belt. There's been more economic growth. Now, jobs weren't those good paying union factory jobs like you had in Michigan or Ohio or Indiana, but jobs were growing, population was growing. I think maybe until very recently, until we ended up with like the hottest days on record, people thought the warm, sunny climate was better. So yeah, I think Michigan has been caught up in an ongoing long-run shift in population away from the Frost Belt, the Great Lakes states, the Midwest, whatever word you want to use for that, to the Sun Belt. In fact, a very famous urban economist, Ed Glazer at Harvard, actually wrote a whole economics paper showing that like sun days and temperature were a big predictor of where population was going. That said, I think if we're lucky, I don't want to make a prognostication. I don't have my crystal ball handy. I think we may have been reaching a tipping point, and the report captured hopefully what is the end of this and maybe the beginning of the end of this. And maybe we're beginning to see yet another shift after COVID. Maybe, hopefully that we can abate this tremendous loss of population in Michigan and other Great Lakes states.
And you yourself have a paper with some recommendations, and we're going to get all into that about how we could possibly go about fixing this. But let's do some level setting first. Like, why does it matter, right? There might be some folks who are like, okay, so like population is slowed. It means more space, in Michigan. Like, help us understand why this is an important issue when we talk about population loss.
Well, first we have to say why it matters for me and why a guy from the University of Toronto who grew up in New Jersey is so concerned with Michigan. It's because my wife is from Michigan, and my kids, although we live in Toronto, I shouldn't say all, my brother has 3 kids, they live in New Jersey, but most of their cousins live in Michigan. In fact, Zoe, my brother's daughter, who's from New Jersey, is going to the University of Michigan to join 5 cousins on my wife's side. So we're going to have 6. I mean, it's sort of amazing to me. I think we have 8 or 9 or 10 nieces and nephews in college. More than half of them are at one university at the university. So it matters to me.
Yeah.
And why does it matter? Well, your question is so interesting and so perceptive. I lived in Pittsburgh for nearly 20 years, and an argument was made when I was in Pittsburgh, not by me, but that actually shrinking population would be good for Pittsburgh. And folks, hold on to your seats. The argument was that Pittsburgh could be like Switzerland without mountain slopes, that what Switzerland did was become richer with fewer people. Now, for most economists, most demographers, there's a little sliver of truth in that, but for most people, they believe, and I think the truth is, when your population grows, you have people, economic assets, consumption, demand. I could go on. You are going to generally grow your economy. And I think what's important for Michigan now, like, this sounds so weird, right? Like, we have a labor shortage. Like, who would have thunk that? Like, and I don't want to say there's still many better good jobs we could create, but in general, when you take all the jobs and what's coming now with reinvestment in manufacturing and electric vehicles and semiconductors, we're going to have a real shortage of workforce. And so I think the idea would be that we need to add people so that we can get our economy jump-started, and we can have the labor force that we need to meet this new demand.
Well, I think that is a great way of taking us to this line of this sentence from your report. Michigan is at a historic inflection point, right? Like that's where we find ourselves right now. And, you sort of hear when you're talking about politics, this is the most historic election yet, or you hear about decades, this is the most important decade yet. But you're really saying it here that right now, specifically for a state like Michigan, this is kind of make or break.
It was really surprising to me. I began my dad worked in a factory in Newark, New Jersey. My dad only had a 7th grade education, got a job in making eyeglasses like yours and mine. I'm not kidding. I mean, they looked like this. And I watched deindustrialization happen. That was a huge eyeglass factory, and I watched the factory decline. I watched my dad get put out of work. I lived in Pittsburgh. I watched the closing of the steel mills. I watched the catastrophe of the auto industry and heavy industry in Michigan. So I have a long history in this. If you would have asked me 5 years ago, could this come back? I would have been maybe, hopefully, let's pray. But what happened, I think, with sort of behind the scenes, if you will, or certainly when I didn't have my eyes on it, is the nature of the auto industry, right? This internal combustion engine, analog thing driven by a driver with a shifter, it changed. And it used to be that the trendy industries were computers and cell phones and digital devices in Silicon Valley and in Boston. All of a sudden, this thing we call the car is becoming something different. It's driven by software. It's assisted by artificial intelligence. It's built by humans and by robotics. And it's powered not by necessarily, in the future, an internal combustion engine, by an electric engine and a battery. Talk about a turning point. And what I tried to grapple with in this report, I'll sort of say it in shorthand for everyone listening in. In the past, when we made these big technological shifts in our country or in the world or in regions, metropolitan or city regions, what happened when this happened, when Boston lost its textile industry in the 1940s and 50s, they said, oh, we're going to grow high-tech industries, we're going to build mini computers. When Pittsburgh lost its steel industry, and I lived there and I taught at Carnegie Mellon, he said, we're going to make software and robots. In the US, when we saw deindustrialization, we said, oh, we don't have to worry about steel and chemicals and all these old industries. We're going to make semiconductors and chips, and we're going to make computers, and we're going to make software, and we're going to make social media and biotech, and we're going to win. This is the first time in my life that I've seen the ability to take new technologies, because you couldn't do that with textiles in Boston. You couldn't do that with steel in Pittsburgh. But with autos in Michigan, you can take semiconductors and computers and artificial intelligence and batteries and literally use that new. So I said it's the first place that we would see new technology be used to transform it. Now, that's big for Michigan, but that's big. That's what we need to do as a country. Like Michigan needs to do this to show our country it can be done. If we can do this, if we can use these new technologies to transform an old, deep-rooted incumbent industry, we'll make Michigan a much better place with much better jobs and more opportunity for young people. But two, we'll show the country. And here's what I think. In the US, we went on this 2-decade-long experiment that we thought we could have high-tech industries and finance and real estate in New York and Boston and Washington and San Francisco and LA. We didn't need to worry about the middle. The big opportunity here is the place you're going to make these things, from semiconductors to automobiles to electric batteries, is in the heartland. That's not just Michigan, that's Ohio and Indiana and Kentucky and Tennessee. But Lord God, if we could do that, we can now rebuild our country. And that's what's so exciting to me. And that's what I think the inflection point is. Can we take these new technologies and use them to rebuild our industries and create good jobs and rising living standards for people?
Oh, there's so much there. And you note that there's really these sort of 3 pillars, right? So let's dig into them. It's transformative technology, right? It's talent, and it's placemaking. I mean, you sort of just lay it out in this paper, like you kind of just got to grab it and do it. So let's start with transformative technology. What does Michigan need to do to get in the game?
Well,
and are people capable?
It has it all. I mean, what's so interesting about Michigan is that you have the leading edge center of automotive research in the world with your companies, with the big companies, Ford and GM, Stellantis, and with the supply infrastructure. The numbers are in the report, but it's like more than half of all R&D in this field of automotive is done in Michigan. Then you think, okay, well, you know, the electric technology, that's Tesla. That's done in California. Rivian, it picked up and it moved from Michigan to California. Or maybe that's done in China or Korea. The robots, the software, well, that's not done in, but then you have your universities, the University of Michigan, Michigan State, Wayne State, and more. And there's a great group of researchers in Michigan who actually called this the University Research Corridor. They just looked at the research at Michigan, Michigan State, and Wayne State. And you know what they found? That's at least as big as like Boston with Harvard and MIT, or San Francisco with Berkeley and Stanford, or LA with UCLA and USC. I mean, so you have the research, and particularly at the University of Michigan, in these key fields. So the idea is all you have to do is really align it. Can you align that research going on in the universities, particularly with the companies? It's easier said than done. But my hunch, when you look at what's happening at the universities, the investment in these new technologies, you look at Michigan Central in downtown Detroit, and you begin to think it's not foreclosed that it will happen, but with a little effort and a little alignment, it can happen. So yeah, I think more than any place else, even if you ask me to stack it up against California or Korea or China, I'd say Michigan. Look, Michigan faces tremendous competition from those places, but it's probably in the single best shape of any place to make that happen. There's a giant misconception out there.
Okay.
And the giant misconception that the report tries to drill down on is that Michigan and Detroit in particular don't retain talent. The fact of the matter is Michigan does spectacularly well at retaining talent. The state ranks 7th in the nation, and get this, hold on to your seats, hold on to your hats. Of all the metropolitan areas in the United States, when it comes to retaining talent, based on certain surveys with data limitations, Detroit ranks between number 1 and number 3. The problem is Michigan and Detroit and its cities don't attract talent. They retain people who grow up there, stay there, with the proviso, you do lose super, super, super teched up, like software engineers. And the report says this, you've got to make a real effort to keep the super teched up software engineers and computer scientists and chemical engineers, because they're going anywhere in the world they can write their ticket. But you don't, the thing is, you have to attract talent. And that's really the key. And I think the big advantage there right now is cost of living. And believe it or not, quality of life. Now, every time I say this, people say, not all of our schools, but Michigan has very, very good public and private schools. The urban centers are challenged. Detroit is challenged. Flint is challenged. But if you look at the public schools throughout the state, particularly in the suburbs, they're very good. Private schools are superb. They're a legacy of this wealthy past. You look at universities, University of Michigan, Michigan State, Wayne State, Michigan Tech, Central, you can go down the list. So you have a good base to build from, and you have affordable housing. One of the things that happened post-COVID, it used to be that New York and San Francisco and Los Angeles were expensive. Miami and Austin and Nashville and all the rest of those Sunbelt towns got expensive. So Michigan has affordable housing and great places to live, not just, all throughout the state. There are spectacular places to live. And then the third one I talked about was place. That one of the things that Michigan has done pretty well is learn how to revive its urban centers. Not only its urban centers, Michigan has actually done really well at making its more lakefront, like Traverse City and that part of up north Michigan. The Brookings Institution in Washington, D.C. did a whole study which said they have used quality of place and place-based assets to attract talent. The one part in the report we talk about that might be seen as controversial, but we think it's not, is that the one place you haven't done this in the state is around your college towns. And I want people to really think about this. If you think about where technology-based development occurs, it didn't occur in San Francisco to start with. It happened in Palo Alto around Stanford, and then that catalyzed the Bay Area. You think about Boston with its high-tech complex. It didn't occur in Boston, it occurred in Cambridge around MIT and Harvard. If you think about Texas, it didn't occur in Dallas and Houston. It happened in Austin. And one of the things we do in the report is simply compare the growth of Austin to the growth of Ann Arbor. Austin goes like this, Ann Arbor goes like this. And one of the points we say is, with everything we know about placemaking, wouldn't it be interesting to try to grow and scale the college towns, Ann Arbor, Lansing, and all the rest of them, all the other spectacular college towns throughout the state, so that those young people, particularly those software engineers and artificial intelligence, computer scientists, when they graduate, they can say, I can take a job in my college town. And one thing we know, like everybody probably knows of Bell's Brewery, the award-winning brewery from Michigan. I mean, when he graduated from school, he's like, no, I don't want to move my brewery anywhere else. I want to make beer and I want to keep it in my college town. I mean, you see that from Michael Dell in Austin to Steve Jobs in, California. Many of these people want to build their companies where they went to school. So I think that's the one thing with place we talk about. Maybe it's time to apply the lessons of placemaking to the college towns. And as we grow population, grow those places too.
Well, and that's this fascinating idea. And I want to get back to that because I did have to hold on to my seat when you were telling, because when I read the report the first time, and I think it did turn a lot of heads on the island, because it was like, wait, say this again. So, the idea is if you can get people, right, if you can build it and they come, it's sticky here. Like people stay. And again,
they're already here. I mean, the thing is, they're at the University of Michigan and Michigan State. I know this. I taught at Carnegie Mellon. I'm a professor at the University of Toronto. These are two, and I went to graduate school for a while at MIT. These are spectacular computer science departments. A fellow at the University of Toronto developed machine learning and deep learning technology, right? The thing that's all the rage in AI. The University of Michigan is at least that good and bigger. So you have the best and the brightest computer engineers, software engineers, artificial intelligence people going to school in Michigan. They're not staying. You need to give them a reason to stay. Now, folks like Doug Song and others in Ann Arbor are doing a really good job of building the startup community, but it's just not big enough. And those kids, and the other thing, I hate to say this because I love the university and I have 6 nieces and nephews there. The universities have a lot of incentive to tell young kids coming out of business or computer science or engineering, go take a job in Silicon Valley or New York because it pays more. And rightly or wrongly, their rankings depend on that, right? Pay levels are part of the way they're rated and ranked by the Financial Times or Business Week or Bloomberg or whatever. So you've got to get better paying jobs, but you've got to get more excitement. And when I was at Carnegie Mellon, this was a big eye opener for me. Before I wrote this book, you mentioned the rise of the creative class. I was trying to study why we were losing our software engineers and computer engineers and why it wasn't sticking in Pittsburgh, a city I love. And by the way, I thought was cooler than Austin or Silicon Valley. And the reason the young people told me is they wanted to live in Austin. Not New York, not San Francisco. These were not hedge fund people. These were computer scientists, kind of nerdy, quiet, technical. They liked Austin because it was a navigable college town. They didn't want to go to the big city to start. So what I'm suggesting is if Ann Arbor was a little bit bigger and had a little bit more opportunity, that could be the way station where these young kids in their 20s, 24, 25, and Lansing and the others would take their first job and build their startup. And maybe as they got older, one of the things we talk about in the report, it's not Palo Alto versus San Francisco. It's not Cambridge versus Boston. When that starts to happen, the college town then fuels the growth of the big city, because then the people, when they get older, say, well, I want to move my family and be part of the big city. So Ann Arbor and Lansing and the rest can all fuel the other cities in Michigan the way the college towns in other states do. And I think that's the way to think about it. And one of the things we talked about is maybe you need some transit connections between Lansing and Ann Arbor and Detroit and other places to make that physical and mental distance, to shrink it. But yeah, I think the assets are there. And to my mind, the college towns are now the missing ingredient.
Richard, Florida, we're going to leave it there. But on that hopeful note about what Michigan's future could look like, we're really grateful for the time.
And I hope to be part of it. I mean, I really think this is important for you, but it's important for our country. If you don't do it, I'm worried about if with all of these assets, if you can't do it, I'm worried about the future of our country. And, I'll tell you one thing. My dad, that 7th grade wisdom, working class wisdom, he's like, Richard, I grew up during the Depression. I saw this country on our knees. I remember the day Pearl Harbor was attacked. He said, I walked down to the enlistment office and I enlisted in the Army. He said, they gave me an old World War I helmet and a broomstick, not a gun, a broomstick. He said, you've never seen a country turn on a dime like America. America, and he said, we were lazy. We didn't want to get involved. There was the Depression. People weren't working. And as soon as that spark ignited, I can't believe he was wrong. There's something in our DNA that allows us to rise. We get lazy. It's like we're living in the 1920s again, with the Gatsby and the rich people and the robber barons. And then all of a sudden a switch goes off. And I think we're at that switch. That's why I called it an inflection point. So I'm hopeful we can get our act together. The numbers are in the report.
And you can see Zoe's entire interview with Richard Florida when it's live streamed on Friday, July 28th at noon on One Detroit's Facebook page. Let's turn now to some of the fun activities taking place in Metro Detroit this weekend and beyond. Here's Peter Whorf of 90.9 WRCJ with today's One Detroit Weekend.
Hi, I'm Peter Whorf with 90.9 WRCJ. The weekend is so close. Summer is flying by, but still there's a lot of fun things to scope out, so let's get to it. The Sterlingfest Art and Music Fair takes place in Sterling Heights through the 29th. The festival shows off many artists along with music performers, science show, magic shows, and more. And on July 28th, LaShawn Phoenix Moore hosts a poetry and music Grand Slam Fest in Sosnick Courtyard at Orchestra Hall. The contest is by invitation only, but anyone can see some of Detroit's finest poets compete for the grand prize and bragging rights. There'll also be R&B music performed throughout the evening. If you're further west of Detroit, be sure to head to historic Chelsea for the Sounds and Sights Festival, July 28th and 29th. It'll feature live music, a kids zone, teen zone, classic car show, chalk art competition. There's so much, I can't name it all. You'll have to check it out for yourself. Also on July 29th, see The Greatest Love of All, a tribute to Whitney Houston, starring Belinda Davids. That takes place at 8 p.m. on the main stage at Music Hall Center for the Performing Arts. Then July 29th and 30th brings the largest Arab and Chaldean Festival in North America to Hart Plaza, where there will be special cultural exhibits, an art gallery, and musical performances from all over the Middle Eastern community. And of course, there's so much more going on in and around Detroit, so here are more events to check out. Have a great weekend.
That will do it for this week's One Detroit. Thanks for watching. Head to the One Detroit website for all the stories we're working on. Follow us on social media and sign up for our weekly newsletter.
From Delta faucets to Behr paint, Masco Corporation is proud to deliver products that enhance the way consumers all over the world experience and enjoy their living spaces. Masco, serving Michigan communities since 1929. Support for this program is provided by the Cynthia and Edsel Ford Fund for Journalism at Detroit Public TV.
The DTE Foundation is a proud sponsor of Detroit Public TV, among the state's largest foundations committed to Michigan-focused giving. We support organizations that are doing exceptional work in our state. Visit dtefoundation.com to learn more.
Nissan Foundation and viewers like you.